I don't want to care for a sick old woman, my son's wife declared. She forced me out after my Parkinson's diagnosis, unaware I held a $30 million fortune. Days later, I bought their rental complex and tripled their rent. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my tale reaches. My hands trembled as Dr. Emily Carter explained my diagnosis, her words fading like static on an old radio. Parkinson's disease, progressive, manageable with medication, but challenging. I sat in her sterile office, my world shrinking with each syllable. "Mrs. Sullivan, do you have family support?" she asked, her voice gentle but practiced. "Yes," I whispered, thinking of my son Andrew and his wife Rachel. I'd lived with them for 4 years since my husband Thomas passed. What I didn't say was how Rachel's patience had worn thin, her sighs louder each month, or how Andrew avoided my gaze when she complained about space. I drove home, my old Toyota rattling, knowing the conversation waiting would change everything. Stick with me and share your city below. The drive back to Andrew and Rachel's house in my battered Toyota felt like it lasted forever. My hands, already stiff from gripping the wheel, ached as if they knew the Parkinson's diagnosis was real. The house was a modest 2-story in a quiet Colorado suburb, the kind of place young couples buy with dreams of starting a family. I'd helped with the down payment 4 years ago after Thomas died, though Andrew insisted his name alone went on the deed. It was his way of proving he was independent, or so he said. Rachel's sleek SUV wasn't in the driveway when I pulled in. She worked part-time at a high-end clothing store, though she spent more time browsing than selling. Andrew was in the living room, still in his security guard uniform, scrolling through his phone. At 34, he had Thomas's broad shoulders and my gray eyes, but the lines around his mouth made him look older, worn down by a life that hadn't turned out as he'd hoped after leaving the army. "Hey, Mom," he said, barely looking up. "How'd the doctor go?" I set my purse on the coffee table, my fingers fumbling with the strap. "Not good, Andrew. We need to talk when Rachel gets home." His eyes flicked to me, a shadow crossing his face. Worry, maybe, or something heavier. "Is it bad?" "We'll talk together," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. My chest tightened, already dreading Rachel's reaction. She'd never been warm, not since I moved in after Thomas's death. Her smiles were polite at first, but over time they'd turned sharp, like she was counting the days until I'd leave. Rachel walked in at 7, her blonde hair flawless despite a supposed full day at work. At 30, she carried herself like someone who expected the world to bend to her. Her designer handbag landed on the table next to my worn purse, the contrast almost comical. "What a day," she announced, kicking off her heels. "The new manager, Karen, is impossible. She actually expected me to stay late to restock. Can you believe it?" Andrew microwaved leftovers, spaghetti from a jar, the kind I used to make from scratch when he was a kid. We ate in silence at the kitchen table, the hum of the fridge filling the space. Finally, I cleared my throat. "I need to tell you both about my doctor's visit." Rachel's fork stopped mid-air. Andrew looked up from his plate, his jaw tight. "I've been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease," I said, keeping my voice even. "It's progressive. Dr. Carter says I'll need help soon. Simple things like opening bottles, carrying bags, maybe dressing on bad days." The silence was heavy, like the air before a storm. Andrew's eyes dropped back to his plate. Rachel set her fork down, the clink loud against the quiet. "What kind of help?" Andrew asked, his voice low. "Daily tasks," I said. Dr. Carter mentioned physical therapy, medications, maybe some home changes down the line, like handrails or a stair lift. "Home changes?" Rachel's voice sliced through the room. "What does that mean exactly?" "Things to make the house safer," I said. "A grab bar in the bathroom, maybe a ramp later, nothing major yet." "Absolutely not." Rachel's chair scraped as she leaned forward. "We're not turning this house into a hospital." Rachel, Andrew started, but she cut him off with a raised hand. No, Andrew, I'm not doing this. Her green eyes locked on me, cold and unyielding. I didn't sign up to be a caregiver. I didn't agree to live in a house full of medical equipment, watching you shake and stumble. My heart pounded, each word hitting like a stone. Rachel, please, I said, but she was already standing, her voice climbing. Do you know what my life would be like? She snapped. Coming home to help you button your shirt, cut your food, pick up your pills when you drop them? I'm 30 years old, Margaret. 30. I have my own life. I looked at Andrew, waiting for him to say something, anything. He'd been 15 when Thomas died, when I worked double shifts at the school to keep us afloat. I'd taught him to drive, paid for his college, helped buy this house. But he just stared at his plate, his hands clenched around his fork. I won't be a burden, I said quietly. I can look into other options, like assisted living. You're damn right you will, Rachel said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, because I'm not spending my life playing nurse to someone else's problems. She's not someone else, Andrew finally said, his voice barely audible. She's my mom. Rachel's laugh was bitter, like she'd bitten into something sour. Your mom, who's been living here for 4 years, Andrew. 4 years. When do we get to live our lives? The words landed like a punch. I waited for Andrew to stand up for me, to remind her I'd given them everything I had. Instead, he looked away, his shoulders slumping. Something inside me broke. Not my heart, but something deeper. The belief that family meant loyalty. I understand, I said, standing on legs that felt heavier than ever. I'll start looking for a place. Rachel's expression softened just a fraction, like she hadn't expected me to give in so easily. It's not that we don't care, Margaret. It's just this isn't fair to anyone. I nodded and walked to my room, the hallways stretching endlessly behind me. As I closed the door, I heard Rachel's voice, low and triumphant. Thank God. I thought we'd be arguing about this forever. Now we can finally turn her room into the home office I've been wanting. Her words followed me like a shadow. I sat on the edge of the bed Thomas and I had shared for 35 years, the one I'd brought here thinking I'd be with family. Instead, I was with strangers who shared my last name, ready to erase me for a desk and a laptop. They didn't know I had resources they couldn't imagine. Thomas and I had lived frugally, saving every penny from his real estate deals. Our bank account wasn't just a safety net, it was a fortress. But as I sat in the dark, listening to them discuss paint colors for their new office, I decided to let them believe I was exactly what they thought, a helpless widow with no options. The apartment on Pine Avenue was small, a one-bedroom with a cramped kitchen and a view of a parking lot. The landlord, Stephen Hayes, looked at me with pity when I toured it, clutching my worn purse like it held my last dollar. $800 a month, he said kindly, throwing in free access to the laundry room. I paid in cash, watching his eyebrows twitch. Most people my age use cards, but cash was simpler, less traceable. The account I used held $12,000, just enough to look like a retiree's savings. My real wealth, $30 million from Thomas's investments, stayed hidden in accounts no one knew existed. Moving day was a Thursday. I hired 2 local kids with a pickup truck for $60. They loaded my old furniture, pieces Rachel deemed fine to take, and a few boxes of clothes and books. Andrew helped, his movements mechanical, his eyes avoiding mine. "You sure you've got everything, Mom?" he asked as we finished. "I'm sure," I said, climbing into my Toyota. Through the window, I saw Rachel watching from the porch, probably already measuring her new office space. The drive to Pine Avenue was quiet, my hands shaking not just from Parkinson's, but from the weight of being discarded. The first week alone was brutal, not because of the disease, though my tremors were worse in the mornings, but because of the silence. No voices, no footsteps, just the occasional hum of Mrs. Dorothy Miller's television next door. She was 73, a widow like me, with a laugh that warmed the walls. I kept to myself, unpacking slowly, adjusting to the small space. On Saturday, I learned how far Rachel's betrayal went. I was walking back from the grocery store, my cart wobbling on uneven pavement, when Laura Bennett called out from across the street. Laura lived a block from Andrew and Rachel, the kind of neighbor who knew everyone's business. "Margaret," she said, hurrying over, her face lit with gossip. "I heard what happened." My stomach sank. "What did you hear?" "At book club, Rachel told everyone," Laura said, her voice dripping with sympathy. "She said your Parkinson's made you erratic, confused, even aggressive. She said you threw a glass at her during dinner once, nearly hit her. She was scared you'd hurt someone." I gripped the cart, my knuckles white. "That's not true." Laura leaned closer, her voice low. "She said you kept forgetting things, leaving the oven on, wandering the house at night. She and Andrew had to ask you to leave for their safety." Every word was a lie, crafted to make me the villain. I could see it in Laura's eyes. She believed Rachel completely. "I see," I said, my voice tight. "She said you refused help, wouldn't consider assisted living, demanded they take care of you," Laura added, shaking her head. "It's so hard when parents get like that." I pushed my cart toward my car, my hands trembling for reasons beyond Parkinson's. "Everyone has their story," I said, forcing a smile. "Take care, Margaret," Laura called after me. "Don't be too hard on Andrew and Rachel. They tried." That night, I opened my laptop with a cup of chamomile tea. I don't know why I checked Rachel's social media, but I did. Her Instagram was a shrine to her perfect life. Photos of new furniture, yoga retreats, and quotes about choosing yourself. A post from 3 days ago showed my old bedroom, now a sleek home office with a white desk and framed art. The caption read, "Reclaiming our space after tough choices. Prioritizing mental health is never easy, but it's necessary." Comments poured in. Heart emojis, praise for her strength, friends who had no clue what she'd done. Another post, from the day I moved out, showed a stock image of an elderly hand with text, "Sometimes love means letting go. Not every family is meant to live together." The comments were worse. "You're so brave. You can't sacrifice your life for someone else." Each one twisted the knife deeper, painting me as the problem, the burden they had to shed. I closed the laptop and stared out my window. The neighborhood lights glowed, families probably eating dinner, laughing, sharing moments I'd never have again. How many people had heard Rachel's lies? How many would avoid me at the next community event? The next morning, a knock woke me. Through the peephole, I saw Lisa Morgan, a young woman in scrubs holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Sullivan, I'm from Care First Home Services," she said when I opened the door. "Your daughter-in-law arranged for us to check on you." "I didn't ask for this," I said, keeping the door half closed. Lisa smiled, professional but warm. "I understand. Sometimes families set this up when someone's reluctant. Mrs. Sullivan, the younger one, said you've been struggling, maybe confused, and they're worried about you living alone." Another lie, another layer to Rachel's story, that I was incompetent, a danger to myself. "I'm fine," I said firmly. "I'm sure you are," Lisa said, her tone practiced. "Can I come in, just to talk?" I let her in, knowing refusal would only fuel Rachel's narrative. She asked about my medications, my routine, whether I was eating enough. Her eyes scanned my sparse apartment, noting my slow movements, the way I steadied my right hand with my left. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table, the truth sinking in. Rachel hadn't just kicked me out. She'd rewritten my story, stripped away my dignity, and convinced everyone I was a problem to be managed. But as I sat there, surrounded by my few belongings, something shifted. Relief. If they thought I was a frail widow with no resources, they wouldn't see me coming. They wouldn't suspect the plans I was already forming. Rachel thought she'd won, thought she'd erased me from her life and her social circle. She had no idea she'd just made the biggest mistake of her entitled Instagram perfect life. 2 weeks after moving into my Pine Avenue apartment, I made my first move, not the kind Rachel would expect from a trembling widow on a fixed income, but one that required the kind of resources I'd kept hidden for decades. I called David Lawson at 8 in the morning on a Monday. David had been Thomas's financial advisor since the early 90s, handling the real estate deals that turned our modest savings into a fortune. He was one of the few who knew the full extent of what Thomas left behind. "Margaret," David said, his voice warm but surprised. "It's been a while. How are you holding up with Andrew and Rachel?" "There's been a change," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "I need a meeting." "Is everything okay?" he asked. I glanced around my small apartment, the chipped coffee mug on my counter, the worn couch Rachel had let me take. It will be. David's office was unchanged from my last visit a decade ago. Same oak desk, same view of downtown Colorado Springs, same leather chairs that smelled faintly of polish. What had changed was the number on my portfolio statement. $30 million, David said, sliding the papers across his desk. Thomas's real estate investments in Denver and Boulder have quadrupled since the 90s. The stock portfolio steady, and the life insurance payout has been compounding for years. I stared at the figures, hearing Thomas's voice from long ago. "Margaret, we live simply. Let the money grow quietly. People don't need to know." "I need your help, David," I said. "I want to buy a property, the Cottonwood Apartments on Aspen Drive." David leaned back, his pen pausing. "That's a big move. Why that complex?" I told him everything, the Parkinson's diagnosis, Rachel's outburst, how she'd called me a burden and kicked me out, the lies she'd spread about my mental state, throwing glasses, leaving ovens on, acting erratic. I told him about the home care worker Rachel sent to check my competency, the Instagram posts painting me as the problem, the neighbors who now pitied me. When I finished, David's jaw was tight. "And Anjo lives in Cottonwood, Unit 3C. They pay $2,500 a month in rent." "I'm teaching Rachel about consequences," I said. David made a note. "What's the plan, Margaret?" "I'm going to own their home and make sure they feel what I felt." Over the next 3 weeks, I worked quietly. I hired Karen Walsh, a private investigator, to dig into Andrew and Rachel's finances, not out of spite, but to confirm what I suspected. Karen's report arrived on a Wednesday, delivered to my apartment in a plain manila envelope. I read it over tea, my hands shaking slightly from the Parkinson's, but my mind sharp. Andrew earned $42,000 a year as a security guard at a mall. Rachel's boutique job brought in maybe $15,000, though she rarely worked a full week. They had $23,000 in credit card debt, mostly Rachel's purchases. Their savings account held $312. Karen's report detailed Rachel's spending: $600 at Bloomingdale's last month, $400 at a spa, a weekend in Aspen that cost $2,500, all charged to Andrew's card, which was nearing its limit. The woman who said she couldn't afford to help me was spending more on facials than I spent on rent. More telling was their rental history at Cottonwood. They'd been late on rent 5 times in the past year, always paying just before eviction notices kicked in. They were one missed paycheck from disaster. That afternoon, I called Summit Property Group, who managed Cottonwood Apartments. The woman who answered, Patricia Evans, sounded exhausted. "Summit Properties, how can I help?" "I'm inquiring about the Cottonwood Apartments on Aspen Drive," I said. "I understand the owner's looking to sell." "Yes, ma'am," Patricia said. "Mr. Hayes has been trying to sell for 10 months. Are you interested in a unit?" "I'd like to buy the entire complex," I said. "All 36 units." There was a long pause. "The whole building?" "Yes, my financial advisor, David Lawson, will handle the details. I'd like to schedule a viewing." "May I have your name?" Patricia asked. "Margaret Sullivan," I said. "I'm working through Lawson and Associates." 3 days later, I walked through Cottonwood with David, Patricia, and the owner, Stephen Hayes. Stephen was in his 50s, tired, eager to offload the property he'd inherited. "Maintenance is a nightmare," he said as we toured the lobby. "Tenants complain about everything: leaky faucets, old carpets. Most are behind on rent half the time. Investors want newer buildings." The complex was sturdy, built in the late 80s, with decent-sized units and a good location near downtown. It needed updates, new paint, modern appliances, but the bones were solid. "What's the asking price?" I asked, though David had already run the numbers. $3.5 million for all 36 units, including existing leases, Stephen said. David glanced at me. The property was worth closer to $4 million, but Stephen's desperation gave us leverage. "I'll need to see all lease agreements," I said, "especially any units with late payments or complaints." That night, I sat in my apartment reviewing every lease. Most were standard, with rents between $2,200 and $2,800. Unit 3C, Andrew and Rachel's, was $2,500 a month, with a lease ending in March. Stephen's records showed 5 late payments and a noise complaint from Mrs. Clara Thompson in Unit 2C below them. She'd reported loud arguments, slammed doors, and objects hitting walls 3 months ago. I wondered if Rachel's story about me throwing glasses was really about her own behavior. The purchase moved fast. Stephen accepted my offer of $3.2 million, paid in cash, with closing set for February 1st. While waiting, I kept up my cover. To the world, I was Margaret Sullivan, a retired teacher scraping by on a pension, shopping at discount stores, driving my old Toyota to free library events. But twice a week, I met with contractors and Summit Properties, planning upgrades to justify rent increases, new flooring, updated kitchens, fresh paint in common areas. Market rates for units like 3C were closer to $3,800 a month. I watched Rachel's routine from a distance. She worked 3 days a week, went to Pilates on Mondays and Wednesdays, and met friends for brunch, always with shopping bags in tow. Her Instagram was full of curated perfection: new shoes, lattes with foam art, quotes about living your truth. Andrew looked exhausted, his security uniform wrinkled, his eyes checking his phone constantly, probably dreading the next credit card bill. I saw them argue twice outside a mall, Rachel gesturing at shopping bags while Andrew rubbed his temples. Through my binoculars, bought for birdwatching, I caught her rolling her eyes, fixing her hair while he talked. They were drowning, and she was too busy posing to notice. Rachel's lies kept spreading. Laura Bennett, the neighborhood gossip, stopped me at the library to check in. "Rachel said at yoga class you've been calling them at odd hours, confused, asking for money," she said, her voice syrupy with pity. "She showed us pictures of the new office in your old room, said it's been a weight off her shoulders." Each lie fueled something cold inside me, not anger, but resolve. I nodded at Laura, letting her believe I was the sad, confused woman Rachel described. It was easier that way. The less they suspected, the smoother my plan would go. On January 25th, David called with final confirmation. "Closing set for February 1st, Margaret. You'll own Cottonwood. What's your next step?" I looked out my window toward Aspen Drive, where Andrew and Rachel were probably eating dinner, oblivious to the storm coming. "I'm going to show them what it means to choose yourself," I said. "They said they couldn't help me. Let's see what they can't afford." The closing happened on a snowy February morning in a conference room that smelled of ink and old carpet. I wore my oldest coat, a thrift store find, and my wedding ring from Thomas, playing the part of a widow counting pennies. Stephen Hayes signed the papers with a grin, already spending the $3.2 million in his head. David sat beside me, his face calm but knowing. "Congratulations, Mrs. Sullivan," the title agent said, handing me the keys to Cottonwood Apartments. "You now own 36 rental units." I gripped the keys, my hands unsteady but my heart steady. "Thank you. I plan to be a very involved landlord." I'd spent the past month preparing. I'd hired Summit Properties for strict rent collection and market rate pricing. Michael Grant, a contractor with 20 years in the business, was lined up to start renovations, new appliances, modern lighting, updated hallways. I'd also scheduled tenant meetings to discuss changes, except for Unit 3C. Andrew and Rachel would get their news differently. That afternoon, I toured Cottonwood as its owner. The building felt different now, like I held its pulse. Michael Grant met me in the lobby, his clipboard full of notes. "Mrs. Sullivan, the upgrades you want, new paint, appliances, flooring, will cost about $180,000, but it'll justify higher rents." "That's the goal," I said. "How soon can you start?" "First week of March," he said. "We'll be done by May." "Good," I said, handing him a list of units to prioritize for upgrades. Unit 3C wasn't on it. That evening, I wrote letters to my tenants. Each was polite, professional, designed to sound fair. "Dear residents, I'm Margaret Sullivan, the new owner of Cottonwood Apartments. Starting in March, we'll begin renovations, new paint, updated appliances, improved common areas to enhance your living experience. These upgrades will require rent adjustments to reflect market value. Summit Properties will provide details soon. I look forward to creating a better home for you. Sincerely, Margaret Sullivan, owner." I printed 36 letters, setting aside one for Unit 3C. Theirs would be special, with a note about their late payments and Mrs. Thompson's noise complaint. I wanted them to know I'd seen their patterns, their choices, their lies. The next week was a blur of meetings with Michael and Patricia. Summit's market analysis confirmed units like 3C could fetch $3,800 a month, competitive for the area. Most tenants accepted the news, some grumbled, a few asked for payment plans. Cottonwood had been neglected under Stephen's ownership, and people knew change was coming. On February 10th, I drove to Cottonwood in my Toyota, my hands shaking slightly as I parked. The lobby's fluorescent lights buzzed as I walked to the mailboxes. Unit 3C's box was scratched, probably from someone's frustration. I slipped their letter inside, feeling a quiet satisfaction. The letter matched the others, except for one addition. "Due to your history of late payments and noise complaints, your rent will increase from $2,500 to $3,800 per month, effective April 1st. If this poses challenges, contact Summit Properties to discuss options, including lease termination." I included copies of their late payment records and Mrs. Thompson's complaint. Then I went home, made tea, and waited. My phone rang at 9 that night, Andrew's number. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was frantic. "Mom, we got this letter about our rent jumping to $3,800. It's a mistake, right? Call me back, please." The second call came at 10. I answered. "Hello, Andrew." "Mom, thank God," he said, his voice shaking. "This letter says our rent's going up over $1,000. We can't afford that. It's gotta be an error." "Who's the landlord?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "Some woman named Margaret Sullivan," he said. "Same last name as us, weirdly. But Mom, we're in trouble. I was hoping maybe you could help? Loan us some money until I get a better job?" I held the phone, my fingers aching. "I'm on a pension, Andrew. I can barely cover my own rent." "Maybe co-sign a loan?" he pleaded. "You're our only family." In the background, I heard Rachel's voice, sharp. What's she saying? Is she helping or not? "She says she can't," Andrew whispered, but I heard him clearly. "Can't or won't?" Rachel snapped. "She's your mother, Andrew. She owes us after we let her live here for years." I almost laughed at the irony. "I need to go," I said. "Good luck." "Mom, wait." I hung up, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. They'd made their choice. Now they'd face mine. The next morning, my phone rang again, Rachel's number. I let it go to voicemail, sipping my tea as her voice filled the room, tight with barely contained panic. "Margaret, it's Rachel. We need to talk. I know things got heated when you left, but this rent increase is serious. Can we sit down and figure this out like adults? I'm sure we can explain things to this new landlord." Her tone was softer than usual, but I could hear the calculation behind it, like she thought a calm conversation could erase what she'd done. I didn't call back. Let her sweat. On February 15th, Patricia Evans from Summit Properties knocked on my apartment door. She was a brisk woman in her 40s, her clipboard a permanent extension of her hand. "Mrs. Sullivan," she said, stepping inside, "I wanted to update you on tenant responses to the rent increases. Most are adjusting or planning to move out by their lease end. Unit 3C, though, Andrew and Rachel Sullivan, have requested a personal meeting with you." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "What did you tell them?" "That you handle all tenant matters through our office," Patricia said. "But Andrew was insistent, said it's a family matter. He mentioned you're his mother." "There's no family matter," I said firmly. "They're tenants, same as everyone else. Same rules apply." Patricia jotted a note. "Understood. They have until April 1st to accept the new rent or vacate. Will you make any exceptions for them?" I looked out my window toward Aspen Drive, imagining Andrew and Rachel arguing over bills they couldn't pay, blaming me while expecting me to fix it. "No exceptions," I said. "Business is business." Patricia nodded and left. I sat back, feeling a strange calm. For months, I'd been the one apologizing, tiptoeing around their feelings, swallowing Rachel's sharp comments about my inconvenience. Now, I held the power, and they didn't even know it was me. The weeks before the rent increase deadline were quiet but deliberate. I met with Michael Grant to finalize renovation plans, new stainless steel appliances, fresh paint in every unit except 3C, modern light fixtures in the hallways. Tenants started noticing the changes, some even thanking me through Summit for investing in the building. Meanwhile, I kept my routine, grocery runs in my old Toyota, clipping coupons, attending free community lectures. To the world, I was Margaret Sullivan, the retired teacher scraping by. No one suspected the woman in the thrift store coat owned a $30 million fortune. Rachel's Instagram posts grew more frantic. A photo of her with a glass of wine captioned, "Tough times call for tough choices. Stay strong." Comments poured in, friends offering sympathy, none questioning her version of events. I knew she was still telling people I'd been impossible to live with, that my confusion and outbursts had forced their hand. Laura Bennett texted me after a neighborhood potluck. "Rachel mentioned you've been calling Andrew at all hours, sounding disoriented. She's worried about you." I didn't reply. Let them build their narrative. It would crumble soon enough. On March 20th, I got a call from Patricia. "Mrs. Sullivan, we have a problem at Cottonwood. Unit 3C tenants are in the lobby demanding to see you. They've been here for hours and won't leave." My stomach tightened, but I was ready. What are they saying? "Andrew keeps saying you're his mother, that there's a misunderstanding," Patricia said. Rachel's louder, making a scene. "She's upset about the rent and the noise complaint we included." "I'll be there in 30 minutes, I said. I dressed carefully, my oldest sweater, a faded scarf, my worn purse. I needed to look like the Margaret they expected, not the one who'd bought their building. When I walked into Cottonwood's lobby, it was chaos. Rachel paced near the mailboxes, her designer jacket clashing with the peeling wallpaper. Her face was flushed, her hair still perfect despite the meltdown. Andrew sat in a corner chair, his security uniform rumpled, his hands clasped tightly. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Patricia stood behind the desk, her professional smile strained. "Mom," Andrew said, jumping up when he saw me, "thank God you're here. We need to talk about this rent thing." Rachel spun around, her eyes blazing. "We don't need a private chat. We need answers. This $3,800 rent is ridiculous. It's theft." I looked at her calmly, noting the diamond earrings catching the light, the purse that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "I'm not sure how I can help with your housing issues," I said mildly. "Don't play innocent," Rachel snapped. "You know why we're here. This landlord, Margaret Sullivan, same name as you, is robbing us blind." "Market rates can be tough," I said. "Maybe you should look for something cheaper." Andrew stepped closer, his voice desperate. Mom, please. I know things went wrong when you lived with us, but you're my mom. You can't just stand there like you don't care. The words stung, but I kept my face steady. Care about you? Like you cared about me when I got my Parkinson's diagnosis? That was different, Rachel cut in, her voice sharp. We weren't equipped to handle your medical stuff. We're not nurses. But you were equipped to spend $700 at Bloomingdale's last month, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Rachel's face froze, then reddened. How do you know about my shopping? I cursed myself silently. A pensioner wouldn't have access to credit reports or private investigators. Andrew, too focused on his panic, didn't notice, but Rachel's eyes narrowed. Mom, please, he said. We'll lose our home. We don't have anywhere to go. You'll figure it out, I said, turning toward the door. People adapt when they have to. Wait, Rachel said, her voice sharper, more calculating. How do you know about my credit card? I paused, Patricia watching us with growing confusion. I could have lied, said I'd heard it from Laura or guessed based on Rachel's lifestyle, but her smugness, the same look she'd worn when she kicked me out, made me tired of pretending. Patricia, I said, can we have a moment alone? Patricia hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the drama unfolding in her lobby. Of course, I'll be in my office. She walked away, leaving the three of us in the tense silence. Rachel crossed her arms, a triumphant smirk spreading. I knew it. You're not some broke old lady, are you? Andrew looked between us, confusion deepening. What's she talking about, Mom? I sat down in the lobby's worn armchair, my joints stiff but my mind clear. Your wife's talking about the fact that I own this building. The silence was deafening, broken only by the hum of the lobby's heater. Andrew's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Rachel stumbled back, catching herself on the mailbox. That's impossible, she said. You live in that dump on Pine Avenue. You shop at thrift stores. I live there because it's what I can afford on my pension, I said. Everything else comes from the $30 million Thomas left me. Andrew collapsed into a chair, his face pale. Rachel's mouth worked silently, like a fish out of water. 30 million? She finally choked out. Thomas was smart with real estate, I said. We lived modestly, saved everything, let the money grow. No one knew, not even you, Andrew. But you acted like, Andrew started, shaking his head. You let us think you were struggling. I let you show me who you really are, I said, meeting his eyes. When you thought I had nothing, you threw me out. You let Rachel call me a burden, tell the neighborhood I was violent, confused, a danger. We would have helped if we'd known you had money, Rachel blurted, then clapped her hand over her mouth. I raised an eyebrow. So you'd have helped if I was rich, but not when you thought I was just a sick old woman? Andrew buried his face in his hands. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean. You meant it, I said, standing slowly. You meant it when Rachel screamed she didn't want to care for me. You meant it when you stood there while she planned her home office before I'd even packed. You meant it when you let her tell everyone I was losing my mind. Rachel's anger flared again. You set us up. This was a trap. No, Rachel, I said. It was a test, and you failed. She stepped forward, her hands clenched, but Andrew grabbed her arm. Don't, he said, his voice breaking. Don't make this worse. Worse? Rachel's laugh was high-pitched, frantic. You're ruining our lives over a family fight. I'm charging market rent, I said. If that ruins your life, maybe look at your own choices. I turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Rachel, I know about the $23,000 in credit card debt, the spa trips, the Aspen getaway while you were late on rent. I know about the noise complaints, the lies you told about me. Her face crumpled. How? Money buys information, I said simply. Andrew stood, his hands shaking. Mom, what do you want from us? How do we fix this? I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised alone after Thomas died, the one I'd worked overtime to support through school, the one who'd chosen his wife's comfort over mine. "You can't fix it," I said. "Some things don't get undone." "But we're family," he whispered. "Not anymore," I said. "You're tenants. You have 2 weeks to decide. Pay the new rent or move out. Patricia will handle everything." Rachel's scream followed me to the door. "This isn't over! You can't do this!" I paused, looking back. "I'm not doing anything to you, Rachel. I'm doing something for me." The cold February air hit my face as I stepped outside, sharp and cleansing. Behind me, I heard Rachel's sobs and Andrew's quiet pleas, but their crisis wasn't mine anymore. I'd given them what they wanted, freedom from me. Now they'd learn what it cost. 3 days later, Patricia called with an update. Unit 3C tenants have given notice. They're moving out by March 31st. "Good," I said. "Any damage?" "They left a hole in the bedroom wall," Patricia said. "Looks like something was thrown." I wasn't surprised. Rachel's temper had always been her loudest trait. "Charge them for repairs," I said. "Who's next for the unit?" "A young couple, Rebecca and Brian Foster," Patricia said. "Both teachers, been looking for a place near the school district. They loved the renovations and agreed to $3,800 a month." "Perfect," I said. Rebecca and Brian moved in a week later, their thank you note arriving with a promise to keep the unit tidy. They were the kind of tenants who made owning a building feel worthwhile, grateful, responsible, a stark contrast to Rachel's entitlement. That night, I sat in my apartment, reviewing Summit's reports. Cottonwood was thriving, tenants settling into the changes, renovations on track. My Parkinson's was manageable, the tremors less frequent without the stress of living with Andrew and Rachel. I'd started physical therapy, and Dr. Carter was pleased with my progress. The quiet of my apartment felt like a gift, not a punishment. At 7, my doorbell rang. Mrs. Dorothy Miller stood there, holding a plate of homemade cornbread. "Margaret, I baked too much again," she said, her smile warm. Dorothy was 73, her arthritis worse than my Parkinson's, but her kindness filled the room. We'd grown close, sharing stories of widowhood and small victories. "Come in," I said, setting out tea. We talked about the community center's new book club, the chilly weather, the stray cat Dorothy had named Whiskers. As she left, she patted my hand. "You seem steadier lately, Margaret, like you've found your footing." "I think I have," I said, smiling. After she left, I returned to my chair, picking up my book, a memoir about resilience I'd found at the library. For the first time in years, I wasn't living for someone else's needs, wasn't bracing for Rachel's next jab or Andrew's silence. I was just Margaret, and that was enough. 2 weeks after Andrew and Rachel vacated Cottonwood, my phone rang on a quiet March evening. The number was unfamiliar, but when I answered, Andrew's voice came through, heavy with exhaustion. "Mom, it's me," he said. I'd been waiting for this call, knowing their finances couldn't have carried them far. "Hello, Andrew," I said, setting down my tea. "We're in trouble," he said, his words rushed. "We moved in with Rachel's friend in Denver. It's a 1-bedroom, and we're on a couch. Rachel's a mess. Panic attacks, crying all the time. I can't find a job that pays enough for us to get our own place." I stayed silent, letting him continue. "I know you're angry," he said. "We messed up when you got sick. I'm sorry, Mom. You're all the family I've got. Can you help us figure this out?" "There's nothing to figure out," I said calmly. "You made choices. Now you're living with them." "But I'm your son," he said, his voice cracking. "Doesn't that mean anything?" I closed my eyes, remembering the night he'd stood silent as Rachel called me a burden, planning her home office while I packed. "You're my son," I said, but that didn't matter when I needed help with my Parkinson's. You chose Rachel's comfort over me. "That was different," he said weakly. "No, it wasn't," I said. "You discarded me because I was inconvenient. Now I'm returning the favor." A long pause stretched between us. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice small. What would it take to forgive us? The question hit harder than I expected. I'd spent months building to this moment, buying cottonwood, raising their rent, exposing their hypocrisy. But forgiveness? I hadn't thought past the mechanics of my plan. I want you to understand what you did, I said finally. Not just kicking me out, but how you did it. How it felt to be called a burden by my own family. To hear Rachel scream she wouldn't care for a sick old woman. To watch you say nothing while she turned my room into her office before I'd even left. Andrew was crying now, his breath shaky. I'm sorry, Mom. I was scared. About money, about Rachel leaving if I fought her. I was weak. You were, I said, and I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't know if I want to. What about Rachel? He asked. She wants to apologize. I almost laughed. She doesn't want to apologize. She wants my money. There's a difference. Silence again. So what happens now? He asked. You build a life without me, I said, like I built one without you. Mom, please. I cut him off. When you threw me out, you didn't just reject my illness. You rejected me as a person, decided I was only worth what I could do for you. That's not family, Andrew. That's using someone with kinder words. He sobbed quietly. I took a breath. If you'd asked for help with my care, I'd have paid for nurses, modified the house, anything to make it work. Instead, you chose the easiest way out, even if it meant hurting me. His sharp gasp told me he realized what they'd lost. Is there anything I can do? He asked. Learn to love people when they need you, not just when they're useful, I said. Start with Rachel. She'll need you now, more than ever. I hung up and sat in my reading chair, picking up the resilience memoir I'd been reading. The afternoon was mine, free of demands or crises. No one would call expecting me to fix their mistakes. No one would mock my tremors or treat my illness like a personal offense. At 5, Mrs. Dorothy Miller knocked, holding a tray of oatmeal cookies. Margaret, I overbaked again, she said, her smile bright despite her arthritis. We sat in my small living room, sharing cookies and stories about our husbands, the community center's book club, the spring flowers starting to bloom. You seem lighter, Dorothy said as she left, like you've let go of something heavy. I have, I said, walking her to the door. Back in my chair, I opened my book to a quote I'd underlined, "No one can diminish you without your permission." I'd given that permission for years, letting family treat my needs as burdens, my presence as optional. No more. Cottonwood was thriving, my Parkinson's was managed, and I'd found peace in a life I controlled. Andrew and Rachel were likely on their Denver couch, still thinking an apology could fix everything. But some bridges can't be rebuilt, and I was finally free. What would you do in my shoes? Have you faced betrayal like this? Share below, and check out 2 more stories on my channel that'll shock you. Thank you for staying with me.